Do you view the passage of time? Do you view time like a timeline, linear, heading off into infinity in the future, never to repeat? If you're like most of us in the modern world, that's how you've come to view time, as in a timeline, linear, never to return and repeat. But to understand the scriptures better, it's also valuable to view time as cycles, as a repeating cycle. That's the way the ancients would view time, and it's easy to understand why, because the experience with time is through the passage of repeating cycles. For example, days are repeating cycles, with the sun rising in the east, rising high, setting in the west, and then nighttime, and then again repeating, rising in the east, high in the sky, setting in the west, and nighttime. Days are these repeating cycles. That's how you count the passage of the days. Similarly, the months, particularly the lunar cycles, are repeating. The phases of the moon repeating each 28 days. The years are the same way, with the winter turning into the spring turning into the summer turning into the fall, and then back to winter again, the repeating cycles. And so the time is viewed has been viewed as the recurrence, the repeating of cycles. Each new day is a repeating cycle, each new month a repeating cycle, each new year a repeating cycle, with variations that occur in each of the occurrences of the cycle. Similarly, biological processes have their cycles. Human life, plant life, animals, they all have their cycles. Babies, they grow up, they have their own children, they have the generations of lives and cycles. And in the old world, they also viewed civilizations and world history as occurring in cycles, in patterns that would occur again and again. And they would point to and notice these similarities in the cycles, and they would use that. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the screen. We're going to look at some instances in the scriptures that kind of look at this cycles, time as cycles, and then also the repetitions and how they would use that and how it'll help us understand the scriptures a little better. Start in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 3, verse 2. Here it says, "For God doth not walk in crooked paths, neither doth he turn to the right hand nor to the left, neither doth he vary from that which he has said. Therefore his paths are straight, and his course is one eternal round." So what does this mean that his course is one eternal round? To help understand this, envision the workings of God as being in cycles, right? A perfect eternal cycle that repeats. And since it's a perfect cycle, it doesn't vary or change cycle to cycle because it's perfect. It's something that's true is going to repeat itself and always be true. So it indicates that God, the way that God acts with man, is in a perfect, recurring, eternal cycle. Okay, now let's take a look at Revelations in the New Testament, chapter 1, verse 8. And this is Jesus Christ talking. He says, "I am Alpha and Omega." Alpha was the first letter of the Greek alphabet. Omega was the last letter of the Greek alphabet. He says, "I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is and which was and which is to come, the Almighty." So he's pointing at what he's emphasizing here. You have parallels. You have parallel with Alpha, the beginning, and the time, things that were in the past. That he was one way and was there in the past. And then Omega, the ending, parallel with the ending, things meaning things which are to come. And he will be there and will be the same in the ending for the things that are to come, showing that he's always there, eternal, from beginning to the end. This kind of fits with that one eternal round, that he is there at the beginning and at the end in a perfect cycle. Okay, now I want to show you, this is in the book of Genesis, and this is in Genesis chapter 39. This is where Joseph of Egypt becomes a ruler in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife is pursuing him. And in verse 10, it says, "It came to pass, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her." And what I want to point out is this phrase that has been interpreted and translated as day by day. If you go to the Hebrew, what it actually says is day, day. It says the word day twice. Let's take a look. So here, the repetition of the temptation day after day emphasizes the ongoing nature of the Joseph's trial. In Hebrew, the phrase that's used is yom, day, yom, day. So what it does is it just says she's tempting him and yom, yom, day, day. And what that does is it triggers an understanding of a repetitive daily cycle, right? Yom Yom, they recognize it. Okay, it's the same thing, day, day, meaning day after day after day after day after day. It's this repetitive cycle. And that would be understood. So we translate it as day after day or day by day or every day. But literally it was day, day, pointing to signaling a cycle that repeats day after day after day. Now, in the scriptures, there are a lot of parallelisms, things that are said multiple times. And one of the reasons this is done is this view of things repeating in cycles. And they would see things in parallels. So, parallels, things that would repeat. So you have a lot of, in the Old Testament in particular, types and shadows, patterns that repeat. You also see this in the Book of Mormon a lot, focusing on patterns that repeat. Okay, so let's take a look at Isaiah chapter 1 here. And what I've done is I have put in color coding some of the parallels so you can see how he keeps using these parallels and how if you recognize that that's what he's doing in using parallels, it helps you to better understand the messages. So for example, let's start with Isaiah chapter 1, verse 2. He says, "Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth." Okay, this is a simple parallel. You see that the word hear and the word give ear are parallels to each other. The O heavens and the O earth are parallel to each other. And so he's repeating and repeating with parallels, the signal, and using parallels with slightly different words or meanings, it helps him to capture the full extent of what he wants to say. It helps him to re-emphasize what he wants to say and go deeper with different with additional understandings into each of the points. Okay, and now in number 3, it's a more complicated parallel. This one actually goes through 4 times. So he says, "The ox knoweth his owner, and the ass his master's crib, but Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider." And what you'll see is he has the parallel with the 4 subjects, the ox, the ass, Israel, and my people. And then he has the parallels with no. So, and once you know these parallels, it helps you to then think and fill in the gaps from where he drops one of the parallels, but you nevertheless can infer it because it's implied in the reading. So, for example, he says, "The ox knoweth his owner, the ass his master's crib." He doesn't repeat that word knoweth, but it's implied, right? The ox knoweth his owner, the ass knows his master's crib. Israel doth not know. He leaves out the object. Here it's the ox knows his owner, the ass his master's crib. When he leaves out the object, because they're the parallels, it lets us insert with our minds our owner or Israel's owner or Israel's master, which are the 2 parallels. So Israel doth not know his owner or his master. My people doth not consider his owner, or its master. So you see how he takes the parallels, repeating cycles, will vary them some each time. But if you know and understand that these are parallels and repeating cycles, it helps you then uh, insert and understand those, insert those in your mind into the reading and understand things better. Verse 4, similarly, you have parallels that go multiple times. He says, "Ah, sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters." And you see that he has the parallels for the sin-related concept: sinful, iniquity, evildoers, corrupters. And then he has the parallels for the people that it's describing: the sinful nation, the people, the seed, the children, right? He's emphasizing by having those parallels, he's able to say it 4 times in slightly different ways, slightly different meanings and scopes. And he has the parallels with forsaken and provoked and gone away. And as you go through, it's just more and more of these parallels. We won't go through them all, but the stricken and the sick and the faint are parallels. The whole head, the whole heart are parallels. The foot and the head are parallels. The different types of diseases and sores are parallels. The different types of healings are parallels. The country, cities, and land are parallels. The descriptions of how they'll be punished, the desolate, burned, devoured, overthrown, etc., are parallels. And so you see how in this Hebrew style of thinking and writing, you have these repetitions, these cycles, and these parallels that are used to give greater understanding and once you understand the patterns that are used. Now, in addition to the parallelisms there are also the repeating cycles that occur, for example, in the Book of Mormon, and you're likely familiar, for example, with a pride cycle. How in the pride cycle that shows up in the Book of Mormon, particularly with Mormon's description of the Nephites, you see them go through these cycles of they become proud and they start to forget and disobey, and then they suffer for their disobedience and disobeying, and they start to have a hard time, whether it's wars or famine or whatever, which causes them to then remember the Lord and be humble again. And they repent and they prosper, but once they prosper, they then forget and disobey and become proud again. And it's this repeating cycle. It's a pride cycle. So again, this idea of these patterns, these cycles, repeat over and over. Now, there are also in the Book of Mormon the chiasmus, also sometimes called chiasm, but you're likely familiar with Alma 36 as an example of that. And this is where you have they're normally done like this, so you can see the parallels to the beginning to the end. And what you have is you'll have a speech or phrases, and they go through this sequence of ideas and get to a point which then reverses the sequence or the cycle so that you have parallels in the concepts all the way up and all the way down. And these are shown normally in this type of format where you see the things lined up. But this could also be portrayed as a cycle where you begin at a point and you come to the bottom, and then the cycle reverses and you come back up and you begin and you end where you began. So just as here he says, he begins with give ear to my words and keep the commandments, he then ends with keep commandments and give, this is according to my word. And you have, so you can see it as a cycle that sort of begins and ends. And in fact, it may have been written such that it would be together on one document or one thing where it could be in a cycle and read repetitively. And we'll talk about that in just a second. Let me go ahead and show you how cycles and chiasmus are kind of the same idea of how things repeat. So for example, the pride cycle, we normally write it as a cycle, but you could also write it like a chiasmus, where it starts with a pride and ends with a pride, and it goes to humility and then back to pride. So here you would have pride, and then you go through disobeying, trouble, suffering, repenting to get to humble. And then it reverses the cycle where once you're humble, you obey and prosper, but then you forget God and get back to proud. So a pride cycle could also be viewed as a chiasmus. Similar cycles that are, prevalent in the scriptures could also be presented as chiasmus. For example, all of the cycles that relate to sort of a fall and a restoration could all be viewed as cycles, but you could also write them as a chiasmus as well. For example, with Adam and Eve, you have them with God, and in Eden, they go through sin, which caused them to fall, which means they're separated from God, but then they are repent and are forgiven, and they're back with God again. So you could just kind of view this as a cycle. So, for example, as a circle, imagine like one of those clocks that goes around where you start at the top, you're with God in Eden, with God in Eden, in paradise. You sin, fall, you're separated from God at the bottom, but then through repenting and forgiven, you're with God again, back at the top of the cycle. In the scriptures, at times it talks about Christ will come at the meridian of time, and we'll talk about world history as sort of a cycle and another thing, but you could view the meridian of time. Meridian literally means noon, or like noontime. So on a daily cycle where the sun goes up, it's the sun at the highest point. So it's a center of a cycle. And so when it talks about that Christ comes in the meridian of time, you could view it as an endpoint of the cycle, or the center of the chiasmus, where you have the fall and then you have Christ as that key hinge point, which reverses the cycle to help bring us back from the fall to be with God again. Similarly, this gathering of Israel could be viewed in the same kind of way as a cycle or as a chiasmus. For example, you have the house of Israel united with God, the people sin, they're scattered, but then God has mercy and they're remembered, to which they're gathered again, they repent and are forgiven, and then the house of Israel will be united with God again. Similarly, you could view the church and apostasy in this way. For example, you have Christ's church, you lose the apostles, you lose the priesthood, you lose the truth, then there's no true church. But everything is restored, and you have the truth regained, the priesthood restored, the apostles regained, and Christ's church restored. Okay, so this kind of gets the point of these cycles to help see things in cycles. All right, so let's go back to Alma 36. As discussed, we point out that this is kind of like this is like a chiasmus that begins and ends with the same idea. It begins and then comes back and parallels and ends at the beginning, sort of like the alpha and omega, the beginning and the end, or the beginning and the end are the same thing. What's interesting is there has been found in Newark, Ohio, some stones, and these are thought to be dated to the Hopewell, the mound builders, the right time frame for the Book of Mormon. I do think that they're authentic. That'll be a different video at some point where we go into those stones more often. But they kind of show the same kind of thing. Let me show you. So these are called the Decalogue stone and the Newark Holy Stone. They can be found at the Johnson Humrick House Museum in Coshocton, Ohio. Here's a picture of them. Again, these were found in Hopewell mound builder mounds. The mounds are clearly authenticated to the right time frame to fit with the Book of Mormon. But then there's question as to whether these are forgeries or not, and that would be a longer discussion that I'd have to do separately. But this stone right here is called the Decalogue stone. And what it has on it is a picture. This is presumed to be Moses. And it has writings in a form of Hebrew that do the Ten Commandments. And the writing goes from the top center down and around the stone and then ends up back at the center. This stone was found inside of a stone case. And then there was also other holy stones found. This one has some Hebrew writings on it. It's sometimes called the keystone. There's also a stone bowl that was found there. I think there's a better picture of you can see the writings, the Hebrew writings on that keystone, that Newark Holy Stone there. I have here actually. I've been to the museum, and this is sort of a replica of the Decalogue stone, where you can have the writing on it. Okay, now what's interesting about the Decalogue stone, and this is taken from materials written by J. Houston McCullough, who was a professor, a retired, I think, professor from Ohio State, who took interest in these stones, and he felt that the stones are authentic. And with the Decalogue stone, you can see a little bit of picture here. The writing starts right with this non-alphabetic point and then comes down this way. And as he says here, he talks about how the stone was found inside a sandstone box. And he says, okay, so the inscription begins at that point at the top. It runs down the left side of the front. It then goes around every available space on the back and the sides, and then back up the right front side of the front to where it begins, so that it ends where it begins, as though it were to be read repetitively. And then similarly with the other stone, the keystone, there's writing on each of the four sides of it. It looks like it was designed to be hung around your neck, or perhaps connected to your arm, and then you can hold it and turn to read the four sides in succession, as he says here, perhaps repetitively, to end where it begins. And the inscriptions on the four sides here were in Hebrew translated as Holy of Holies, King of the Earth, the Law of God, and the Word of God. Okay, and then he talks about the locations where they were found, the Hopewell earthworks. Okay. There are a couple of, let's see, additional views of, yeah, the Decalogue stone, so you can see it a little better. So you have the writings there. Again, this is, looks like, is meant to say a Moses. Actually, it could be interpreted as Mosiah as well, but likely interpreted to be Moses, and then the Ten Commandments that go around. And as he said, it goes all the way around the back side through all of the spaces and back on the front up to where it meets perfectly. And so, if you imagine the amount of time and effort and planning it would take to have the full writing of all of the Ten Commandments, and then to start engraving on the stone and have it so that evenly spaced out, you go and use all of the space all around the stone and end back at the perfect point. It's a pretty impressive level of planning. But my point here is, in addition to this being potential evidence for the Book of Mormon, it kind of shows this idea of writing where it's done in cycles to be repeated, where the ending comes back to the beginning, which then again helps us understand the scriptures where it talks about God's path as one eternal round, or in Revelations where it says that God is the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, which was and it is to come. So anyway, that I'll go ahead and stop share there. Anyway, I found those ideas interesting. I hope they'll be helpful for you to sort of see and understand a little bit better how the ancient Hebrews would view time as repeating cycles, patterns that would repeat, sometimes with variations, but if it's a perfect cycle, it'll always be the same. But with these repeating cycles, and then how they would use these in the scriptures, because that's how they saw the passage of time. And if in some future presentation, I'll also do a thing about world history as a chiasmus or as a cycle, because I think that that's also something that's worth talking about and understanding a little bit better. But if you have any comments or suggestions, let me know. Thanks.